find it weird when many of the YouTubers on the left end up making videos about similar topics around the same time. I just finished my You Could Be the Next Mass Shooter video, which sets up a video series on how we can address the mass shooting problem, and ContraPoints releases her video titled Men. In this video, she earnestly brings up the subject of men without calling them out or finger pointing. She ends with a call to action, which is something that I was already trying to formulate. See, the problem here is that when trying to idealize the concept of 21st century manhood, this isn't something that someone can do in his or her own backyard. This will take a societal effort. Natalie states 3 things that were once the driving force behind our idea of what a man is. These 3 things are the sacrificial role of warriors, the traditional protector role, and that the current aspirational representation of manhood has been labeled as toxic and bad. These 3 things have provided a sense of purpose and identity for young men to aspire to be. Natalie points out loneliness as well, but I think this may be more contributed to the alienation of capitalism than that failure of archetypes for men. This video is going to be done in a couple of parts because there's a lot to go over here. We should start at the concept of man throughout history to understand how we have gotten to this point. I'm not a historian, nor am I a gender studies expert. However, I'm just going to go over some brief points in history to give an overall assumption of masculinity. By going over history, I hope to build off the concepts in the past and to define how we've gotten to where we are today. This video will solely be about the concept of masculinity as it's performed. My next video will go over how masculinity was defined through art and media. Both aspects together create this overarching narrative of masculinity. Part 1. History of masculinity as performance. Try to think about early man, like some of the first men. Their behaviors we generally attribute to what we know about apes and monkeys. We describe them as living in nomadic communities. The men went out and hunted while the woman cared for the young. While this may or may not be true, this is the narrative we built around our ancestors. This narrative creates a vision and purpose for the generation that it's being taught in. What does this narrative produce? Structure and expectations on the individuals living in the community. The men trained to become hunters to fulfill their roles. The community dependent on their ability to bring back game. If they failed, then their community could die. It outlined this need for men to be this protector and provider. It gave them purpose, direction, and a clear long-term goals in life. Not only that, the social aspect of the community helped them cope with loneliness and the feeling of alienation, which I still believe is more of a byproduct of capitalism in today's world. The idea of masculinity in ancient Egypt was centered on labor. Men were seen as workers, with few being predetermined as rulers. Labor was divided based upon the physical structure of male bodies. They took care of all the agriculture and stock raising, as well as provided the protection of the city. Their brute strength led to expectations of them, protecting and serving society. China and other Nordic societies were also centered on the power and influence of men as warriors and keepers of the religion. In ancient Greece, there was also competing ideas of masculinity. Look at the 2 most powerful political entities at the time, Athens and Sparta. The geographical way to look at their divide was Athens was more urban while Sparta was more rural. These different ways of life shaped the way each viewed what masculine was. Greek masculinity was centered around the virtue of courage. How each group exhibits this virtue varies greatly. The Spartans were professional soldiers. Not these Spartans, these ones. Every aspect of their society prepared them for war. Therefore, courage as human excellence took precedence over all other traditional values. If a Spartan acted cowardly on the battlefield, they would lose citizen status and be so humiliated back home that suicide or exile would be the more preferable option. Children trained in camp starting at age 7 and were subjected to brutal and harsh discipline. There's a story of a Spartan youth capturing a fox and hiding it in his cloak. Not wishing to be caught because it would bring him shame, he continued to hold the fox close to his body, even as it clawed and chewed on his vital organs. These anecdotes were praised and celebrated. Athenians also highly valued courage, but it was one of many virtues that were celebrated. War was secondary to regular life, and Athens did not have a standing army. To paint a better picture of their views of courage, let's look at the importance of the shield for both cultures. Dropping one shield allowed for the defender to quickly escape a heavily armed attacker. A Spartan would rather die than return without their shield because it would be a sign of cowardice. It's said that Spartan mothers would tell their children to come back with their shield or on it. To Athenians, though, while soldiers were expected to stand and fight for their city, there was some debate about its importance. A poem from Archilochus of Thasos saying, "Some barbarian is waving my shield, and since I was obligated to leave that perfectly good piece of equipment behind under a bush. But I got away, so what does it matter? Let the shield go. I can buy another one equally good." Contrast that with Tyrtaeus of Sparta's words, "Here is courage, mankind's finest possession. Here is the noblest prize that a man can endeavor to win, and it is a good thing his city and all the people share with him. When a man plants his feet and stands in the foremost spears, relentlessly, all thought of foul flight completely forgotten." Another way masculinity was performed by these groups was through patriarchy. Yeah, I said it. How does one perform masculinity when not at war? Well, by being the head of the fucking household. In Athens, the head of the household had ultimate authority. The state had very little say in how he treated his wife, children, slaves, and his free time. Since Spartans moved away at 7 to live in military barracks, the women ran the house. According to Plutarch, a Greek biographer, Spartans did not marry until the age of 30, in which, with the help of friends, a woman was kidnapped, taken to his home, and raped in the night. When he emerged the next day, she was his wife, and he went back to camp. Paternal responsibilities was shared between all male members in the Spartan community, unlike in Athens, where the man would decide whether a newborn child would live or die. The Gerousia inspected every Spartan infant and made the decision based upon its utility to the state. Because of this, Sparta eventually ran out of citizens, and that led to its decline. Sparta looked at the family as a means for the state, while Athens, it was a means to carry on the bloodline, or the individual. They encouraged the reverence of their ancestors so that the individual did not die in death. Masculinity was also portrayed through being politically active. While the Athenians thought only the manliest of men would be politicians because they used rhetoric and intellect to gain power, Spartans thought the exact opposite. They actively drove out intellectuals and artists in support of their militaristic views. Through sexuality, it was done by contrasting what was not masculine. Perceived female characteristics were used as a form of an attack, insult, or moral admonition. We haven't gotten far from that. Look at this chart. The characteristics on the left are generally attributed to masculine, while the ones on the right are generally attributed to the feminine. During medieval times, the narrative of the knight drove one kind of masculinity. It centered on the ideas of chivalry and a code of conduct for the perfect courtly Christian warrior. They were considered a class of lower nobility. It was one of the few positions one could rise to regardless of birth. Chivalry entailed a litany of very specific duties, though, including riding on war horses, jousting, attending tournaments, holding round tables, and hunting, as well as aspiring to the more ethereal views of faith, hope, charity, justice, strength, moderation, and loyalty. On the other hand, most men didn't have this position. They usually worked for wealthier men as servants. The subjugation of women was always a part of masculinity as well, as proving himself against other men or children. In the university, the use of one's knowledge and intellect was a way to dominate other men. When it came to the larger social aspects, being able to economically be dependent and successful, masculinity varied across class, but generally included not being a woman in competition between other men and elders. Fast forward to America, where the masculine is defined through many different roles: the head of the household, the breadwinner, the warrior, and the self-made millionaire. All of our views of masculinity are centered on competition. As an example, it wasn't until recently that women professional sports teams got any real respect. Men still dominate one of the largest arenas, football. Throughout American history, these roles have defined not only what is masculine, but also what means to be a man. It defined their path in order to gain a perceived privilege that they felt was owed to them. We no longer take our young men into the woods and teach them to build huts and hunt when they return and have somehow earned this new role and respect in society. Now, in almost every aspect of what we have typically defined and seen as masculine, our hard journey to gaining social equality for women have destroyed these concepts. This is not a bad thing at all. We should be moving towards an ever-increasing equal society. As more women take the roles of previous masculine ideas, we should be constructing new concepts of masculinity to fill the void. We should not have this cultural perspective that if you fail in one of those areas, that you're not a man. We need to redefine purpose for men in our society. While not everybody needs a clearly defined social role, those who forge their own path, we have to provide a blueprint for those who do need it. Religion once did this, but its influence has declined over the years. Film and media once did this, and while there are slow and incremental changes happening, we are still producing an image of masculinity that is not obtainable for all men in our society. We need to forge a new path for what it means to be masculine. We need to forge a new path for our young men in society before someone else does, before the alt-right do, before the Nazis do, before white nationalists do. We have to craft and create the ideal 21st century man, an image that is obtainable and creates a certain aspect of esteem once you've gained it. On top of that, capitalism is alienating us more and more. Marketing and advertising are producing superhuman images that no one can really be. Competition is driving us apart when we should be helping each other up. Don't let this happen. Let's do something now about it. My kids depend on it. Our youth depends on it. Our future depends on it. Alright, if you liked the video, like, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next one in the series, where I plan on going over the story and the narratives of masculinity throughout time. Thanks, guys, and have a good one.